This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. Chapter 36. As soon as we reckoned everybody was asleep that night, we went down the lightning rod and shut ourselves up in the lean-to and got out our pile of foxfire and went to work. We cleared everything out of the way about 4 or 5 foot along the middle of the bottom log. Tom said we was right behind Jim's bed now and we'd dig in under it, and when we got through there couldn't nobody in the cabin ever know that there was any hole there, because Jim's counterpin hung down most to the ground, and you'd have to raise it up and look under to see the hole. So we dug and dug with the case knives till most midnight, and then we was dog tired, and our hands was blistered, and yet you couldn't see we'd done anything hardly. At last I says, "This ain't no 37-year job, this is a 38-year job, Tom Sawyer." He never said nothing, but he sighed, and pretty soon he stopped digging, and then for a good little while I knowed that he was thinking. Then he says, "It ain't no use, Huck. It ain't a-goin' to work. If we was prisoners it would, because then we'd have as many years as we wanted, and no hurry. And we wouldn't get but a few minutes to dig every day, while they was changing watches. And so our hands wouldn't get blistered, and we could keep it up right along, year in and year out, and do it right, and the way it ought to be done. But we can't fool along. We got to rush. We ain't got no time to spare. If we was to put in another night this way, we'd have to knock off for a week to let our hands get well. Couldn't touch a case knife with 'em sooner." "Well, then, what are we going to do, Tom?" "I'll tell you. It ain't right, and it ain't moral, and I wouldn't like it to get out. But there ain't only just the one way. We got to dig him out with the picks and let on it's case knives." "Now you're talking," I says. "Your head gets leveler and leveler all the time, Tom Sawyer," I says. "Picks is the thing, moral or no moral. And as for me, I don't care shucks for the morality of it, nohow. When I start in to steal a nigger or a watermelon or a Sunday school book, I ain't no ways particular how it's done, so it's done. What I want is my nigger, or what I want is my watermelon, or what I want is my Sunday school book. And if a pick's the handiest thing, that's the thing I'm a-goin' to dig that nigger or that watermelon or that Sunday school book out with. And I don't give a dead rat what the authorities thinks about it, nuther." "Well," he says, "there's excuse for picks and letting on in a case like this. If it weren't so, I wouldn't approve of it. Nor I wouldn't stand by and see the rules broke, because right is right and wrong is wrong, and a body ain't got no business doing wrong when he ain't ignorant and knows better. It might answer for you to dig Jim out with a pick, without any letting on, because you don't know no better. But it wouldn't for me, because I do know better. Gimme a case knife." He had his own by him, but I handed him mine. He flung it down and says, "Gimme a case knife." I didn't know just what to do, but then I thought. I scratched around amongst the old tools and got a pickaxe and give it to him, and he took it and went to work and never said a word. He was always just that particular, full of principle. So then I got a shovel, and then we picked and shoveled, turned about, and made the fur fly. We stuck to it about a half an hour, which was as long as we could stand up, but we had a good deal of a hole to show for it. When I got upstairs I looked out at the window and see Tom doing his level best with the lightning rod, but he couldn't come it, his hands was so sore. At last he says, "It ain't no use, it can't be done. What you reckon I better do? Can't you think of no way?" "Yes," I says, "but I reckon it ain't regular. Come up the stairs and let on it's a lightning rod." So he done it. Next day Tom stole a pewter spoon and a brass candlestick in the house for to make some pens for Jim out of, and 6 tallow candles, and I hung around the nigger cabins and laid for a chance, and stole 3 tin plates. Tom says it wasn't enough, but I said nobody wouldn't ever see the plates that Jim throwed out, because they'd fall in the dog fennel and jimson weeds under the window hole. Then we could tote them back, and he could use them all over again. So Tom was satisfied. Then he says, "Now the thing to study out is how to get the things to Jim." "Take them in through the hole," I says, "when we get it done." He only just looked scornful, and said something about nobody ever heard of such an idiotic idea, and then he went to studying. By and by he said he had ciphered out 2 or 3 ways, but there warn't no need to decide on any of 'em yet. Said we got to post Jim first. That night we went down the lightning rod a little after 10, and took one of the candles along and listened under the window hole, and heard Jim snoring. So we pitched it in, and it didn't wake him. Then we whirled in with the pick and shovel. In about 2 hours and a half the job was done. We crept in under Jim's bed and into the cabin, and pawed around and found the candle and lit it, and stood over Jim a while, and found him looking hearty and healthy, and then we woke him up gentle and gradual. He was so glad to see us he most cried, and called us honey, and all the pet names he could think of, and was for having us hunt up a cold chisel to cut the chain off of his leg with right away, and clearing out without losing any time. But Tom he showed him how unregular it would be, and set down and told him all about our plans, and how we could alter them in a minute any time there was an alarm, and not to be the least afraid, because we would see he got away sure. So Jim he said it was all right, and we sat there and talked over old times a while. And then Tom asked a lot of questions, and when Jim told him Uncle Silas come in every day or 2 to pray with him, and Aunt Sally come in to see if he was comfortable and had plenty to eat, and both of them was kind as they could be, Tom says, "Now I know how to fix it. We'll send you some things by them." I said, "Don't do nothing of the kind. It's one of the most jackass ideas I ever struck." But he never paid no attention to me. Went right on. It was his way when he got his plans set. So he told Jim how we'd have to smuggle in the rope ladder pie and other large things by Nat, the nigger that fed him, and he must be on the lookout and not be surprised, and not let Nat see him open them. And we would put small things in Uncle's coat pockets, and he must steal them out. And we would tie things to Aunt's apron strings, or put them in her apron pocket if we got a chance, and told him what they would be and what they was for, and told him how to keep a journal on the shirt with his blood, and all that. He told him everything. Jim he couldn't see no sense in the most of it, but he allowed we was white folks and knowed better than him. So he was satisfied, and said he would do it all just as Tom said. Jim had plenty corncob pipes and tobacco, so we had a right down good sociable time. Then we crawled out through the hole, and so home to bed, with hands that looked like they'd been chawed. Tom was in high spirits. He said it was the best fun he ever had in his life, and the most intellectual, and said if we only could see his way to it, we would keep it up all the rest of our lives and leave Jim to our children to get out, for he believed Jim would come to like it better and better the more he got used to it. He said that in that way it could be strung out to as much as 80 year, and would be the best time on record. And he said it would make us all celebrated that it had a hand in it. In the morning we went out to the woodpile and chopped up the brass candlestick into handy sizes, and Tom put them and the pewter spoon in his pocket. Then we went to the nigger cabins, and while I got Nat's notice off, Tom shoved a piece of candlestick into the middle of a corn pone that was in Jim's pan, and we went along with Nat to see how it would work, and it just worked noble. When Jim bit into it, it most smashed all his teeth out, and there warn't ever anything could have worked better. Tom said so himself. Jim he never let on but what it was only just a piece of rock or something like that that's always getting into bread, you know. But after that he never bit into nothing but what he jabbed his fork into it 3 or 4 places first. And whilst we was a-standing there in the dimmish light, here comes a couple of the hounds bulging in from under Jim's bed, and they kept on piling in till there was 11 of 'em, and there warn't hardly room in there to get your breath. By jings, we forgot to fasten that lean-to door. The nigger Nat he only just hollered "Witches!" once, and keeled over on to the floor amongst the dogs, and begun to groan like he was dying. Tom jerked the door open and flung out a slab of Jim's meat, and the dogs went for it, and in 2 seconds he was out himself and back again and shut the door, and I knowed he fixed the other door too. Then he went to work on the nigger, coaxing him and petting him, and asking him if he'd been imagining he saw something again. He raised up and blinked his eyes around and says, "Mars said you'll say I's a fool, but if I didn't believe I see most 1,000,000 dogs or devils or something, I wish I may die right here in dese tracks. I did most sho'ly. Mars said I felt 'em. I felt 'em, sir. They was all over me. Dad fetch it, I just wished I could get my hands on one of dem witches just once. Only just once, that's all I'd ask. But mostly I wish they'd leave me alone, I does." Tom says, "Well, I tell you what I think. What makes them come here just at this runaway nigger's breakfast time? It's because they're hungry. That's the reason. You make them a witch pie, that's the thing for you to do." "But my land, Mars Sid, how's I goin' to make 'em a witch pie? I don't know how to make it. I ain't ever hearn of such a thing before." "Well, then, I'll have to make it myself." "Will you do it, honey? Will you? I'll worship the ground at your foot, I will." "All right, I'll do it, seeing it's you, and you've been good to us and showed us the runaway nigger. But you got to be mighty careful. When we come around, you turn your back, and then whatever we've put in the pan, don't you let on you see it at all. And don't you look when Jim unloads the pan. Something might happen. I don't know what. And above all, don't you handle the witch things." "Handle 'em, Mars Sid? What is you a talking about? I wouldn't lay the weight of my finger on 'em. Not for $10,000,000 billion, I wouldn't." End of chapter. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. Chapter 37. That was all fixed. So then we went away and went to the rubbish pile in the backyard, where they keep the old boots and rags and pieces of bottles, and wore-out tin things and all such truck, and scratched around and found an old tin washpan, and stopped up the holes as well as we could to bake the pie in, and took it down cellar and stole it full of flour and started for breakfast. And I found a couple of shingle nails that Tom said would be handy for a prisoner to scrabble his name and sorrows on the dungeon walls with, and dropped one of them in Aunt Sally's apron pocket, which was hanging on a chair, and the other we stuck in the band of Uncle Silas's hat, which was on the bureau, because we heard the children say their pa and ma was going to the runaway nigger's house this morning, and then went to breakfast. And Tom dropped the pewter spoon in Uncle Silas's coat pocket, and Aunt Sally wasn't come yet, so we had to wait a little while. And when she come she was hot and red and cross, and couldn't hardly wait for the blessing. And then she went to sluicing out coffee with one hand and cracking the handiest child's head with her thimble with the other, and says, "I've hunted high and I've hunted low, and it does beat all what has become of your other shirt." My heart fell down amongst my lungs and livers and things, and a hard piece of corn crust started down my throat after it, and got met on the road with a cough, and was shot across the table, and took one of the children in the eye and curled him up like a fishing worm, and let a cry out of him the size of a war whoop. And Tom he turned kind of blue around the gills, and it all amounted to a considerable state of things for about a quarter of a minute or as much as that, and I would have sold out for half price if there was a bidder. But after that we was all right again. It was the sudden surprise of it that knocked us so kind of cold. Uncle Silas he says, "It's most uncommon curious. I can't understand it. I know perfectly well I took it off because you hain't got but one on. Just listen at the man. I know you took it off, and know it by a better way than your wool-gathering memory, too, because it was on the clothesline yesterday. I see it there myself. But it's gone, that's the long and the short of it, and you'll just have to change to a red flannel one till I can get time to make a new one. And it'll be the third I've made in 2 years. It just keeps a body on the jump to keep you in shirts, and whatever you do manage to do with 'em all is more'n I can make out. A body'd think you would learn to take some sort of care of 'em at your time of life."
"I know it, Sally, and I do try all I can. But it oughtn't to be altogether my fault, because, you know, I don't see them nor have nothin' to do with them except when they're on me, and I don't believe I've ever lost one of them off of me."
"Well, it ain't your fault if you haven't, Silas. You'd 'a done it if you could, I reckon. And the shirt ain't all that's gone, nuther. There's a spoon gone, and that ain't all. There was 10, and now there's only 9. The calf got the shirt, I reckon, but the calf never took the spoon, that's certain."
"Why, what else is gone, Sally?"
"There's 6 candles gone, that's what. The rats could 'a got the candles, and I reckon they did. I wonder they don't walk off with the whole place, the way you're always goin' to stop their holes and don't do it. And if they warn't fools they'd sleep in your hair, Silas. You'd never find it out, but you can't lay the spoon on the rats, and that I know."
"Well, Sally, I'm in fault, and I acknowledge it. I've been remiss, but I won't let tomorrow go by without stoppin' up them holes."
"Oh, I wouldn't hurry. Next year'll do. Matilda Angelina Araminta Phelps!" Whack comes the thimble, and the child snatches her claws out of the sugar bowl without fooling around any. Just then the nigger woman steps on to the passage and says, "Missus, there's a sheet gone." "A sheet gone? Well, for the land's sake!"
"I'll stop up them holes today," says Uncle Silas, looking sorrowful.
"Oh, do shut up. Suppose the rats took the sheet? Where's it gone, Lize?" "Glad to goodness I ain't no notion, Miss Sally. She was on de clothesline yistiddy, but she done gone. She ain't dere no mo' now." "I reckon the world is comin' to an end. I never see the beat of it in all my born days. A shirt and a sheet and a spoon and 6 "Missus," comes a young yaller wench, "dere's a brass candlestick missin'." "Clear out from here, you hussy, I'll take a skillet to you." Well, she was just a boilin'. I begun to lay for a chance. I reckoned I would sneak out and go for the woods till the weather moderated. She kept a ragin' right along, running her insurrection all by herself, and everybody else mighty meek and quiet, and at last Uncle Silas, looking kind of foolish, fishes up that spoon out of his pocket. She stopped with her mouth open and her hands up, and as for me, I wished I was in Jerusalem or somewheres. But not long, because she says, "It's just as I expected. So you had it in your pocket all the time, and like as not you've got the other things there too. How'd it get there?"
I really don't know, Sally," he says, kind of apologizing, "or you know I would tell. I was a studyin' over my text in Acts 17 before breakfast, and I reckon I put it in there, not noticin', meaning to put my Testament in, and it must be so, because my Testament ain't in. But I'll go and see, and if the Testament is where I had it, I'll know I didn't put it in, and that will show you that I laid the Testament down and took up the spoon and—" "Oh, for the land's sake, give a body a rest! Go 'long now, the whole kit and bilin' of you, and don't come nigh me again till I've got back my peace o' mind." I'd 'a' heard her if she'd 'a' said it to herself, let alone speaking it out, and I'd 'a' got up and obeyed her if I'd 'a' been dead. As we was passin' through the settin' room, the old man he took up his hat, and the shingle nail fell out on the floor, and he just merely picked it up and laid it on the mantel shelf, and never said nothin', and went out. Tom see him do it, and remembered about the spoon, and says, "Well, it ain't no use to send things by him no more. He ain't reliable." Then he says, "But he done us a good turn with a spoon, anyway, without knowin' it, and so we'll go and do him one without him knowin' it, stop up his rat holes." There was a noble good lot of them down cellar, and it took us a whole hour, but we done the job tight and good and shipshape. Then we heard steps on the stairs, and blowed out our light and hid, and here comes the old man with a candle in one hand and a bundle of stuff in the other, looking as absent-minded as year before last. He went a-moonin' around, first to one rat hole and then another, till he'd been to them all. Then he stood about 5 minutes, picking tallow drip off of his candle and thinking. Then he turns off slow and dreamy towards the stairs, saying, "Well, for the life o' me I can't remember when I done it. I could show her now that I warn't to blame on account of the rats. But never mind. Let it go. I reckon it wouldn't do no good." And so he went on a-mumblin' upstairs, and then we left. He was a mighty nice old man, and always is. Tom was a good deal bothered about what to do for a spoon, but he said we got to have it, so he took a think. When he had ciphered it out, he told me how we was to do. Then we went and waited around the spoon basket till we see Aunt Sally comin', and then Tom went to counting the spoons and laying them out to one side, and I slid one of them up my sleeve, and Tom says, "Why, Aunt Sally, there ain't but 9 spoons yet." She says, "Go 'long to your play and don't bother me. I know better. I counted 'em myself." "Well, I've counted them twice, Auntie, and I can't make but 9." She looked out of all patience, but of course she come to count. Anybody would. "I declare to gracious there ain't but 9," she says. "Why, what in the world? Plague take the things. I'll count 'em again." So I slipped back the one I had, and when she got done counting, she says, "Hang the troublesome rubbage, there's 10 now." And she looked huffy and bothered both. But Tom says, "Why, Auntie, I don't think there's 10. You numbskull, didn't you see me count 'em?" "I know, but—" "Well, I'll count 'em again." So I smooched one, and they come out 9, same as the other time. Well, she was in a tearing way, just a tremblin' all over, she was so mad. But she counted and counted till she got that addled she'd start to count in the basket 4 spoons sometimes, and so 3 times they come out right, and 3 times they come out wrong. Then she grabbed up the basket and slammed it across the house and knocked the cat galley west. And she said clear out and let her have some peace, and if we come bothering round her again betwixt that and dinner she'd skin us. So we had the odd spoon and dropped it in her apron pocket while she was a-giving us our sailing orders, and Jim got it all right along with her shingle nail
before noon. We was very well satisfied with this business, and Tom allowed it was worth twice the trouble it took, because he said now she couldn't ever count them spoons twice alike again to save her life, and wouldn't believe she'd counted them right if she did, and said that after she'd about counted her head off for the next 3 days, he judged she'd give it up and offer to kill anybody that wanted her to ever count them any more. So we put the sheet back on the line that night and stole one out of her closet, and kept on putting it back and stealing it again for a couple of days, till she didn't know how many sheets she had any more, and she didn't care, and warn't a-going to bullyrag the rest of her soul out about it, and wouldn't count them again not to save her life. She'd druther die first. So we was all right now, as to the shirt and the sheet and the spoon and the candles, by the help of the calf and the rats and the mixed-up counting, and as to the candlestick, it warn't no consequence. It would blow over by and by. But that pie was a job. We had no end of trouble with that pie. We fixed it up away down in the woods and cooked it there, and we got it done at last, and very satisfactory too, but not all in one day, and we had to use up 3 washpans full of flour before we got through, and we got burnt pretty much all over in places, and eyes put out with the smoke, because, you see, we didn't want nothing but a crust, and we couldn't prop it up right, and she would always cave in. But of course we thought of the right way at last, which was to cook the latter too in the pie. So then we laid in with Jim the second night, and tore up the sheet all in little strings, and twisted them together, and long before daylight we had a lovely rope that you could have hung a person with. We let on it took 9 months to make it. And in the forenoon we took it down to the woods, but it wouldn't go into the pie. Being made of a whole sheet that way, there was rope enough for 40 pies if we'd have wanted them, and plenty left over for soup or sausage or anything you choose. We could have had a whole dinner. But we didn't need it. All we needed was just enough for the pie, and so we throwed the rest away. We didn't cook none of the pies in the washpan, afraid the solder would melt, but Uncle Silas he had a noble brass warming pan which he thought considerable of, because it belonged to one of his ancestors, with a long wooden handle that come over from England with William the Conqueror in the Mayflower or one of them early ships, and was hid away up garret with a lot of other old pots and things that was valuable, not on account of being any account, because they warn't, but on account of them being relics, you know. And we snaked her out private, and took her down there, but she failed on the first pies, because we didn't know how, but she come up smiling on the last one. We took and lined her with dough, and set her in the coals, and loaded her up with rag rope, and put on a dough roof, and shut down the lid, and put hot embers on top, stood off 5 foot with a long handle, cool and comfortable, and in 15 minutes she turned out a pie that was a satisfaction to look at. But the person that ate it would want to fetch a couple of kegs of toothpicks along, for if that rope ladder wouldn't cramp him down to business, I don't know nothing what I'm talking about, and lay him in enough stomach ache to last him till next time too. Now it didn't look when we put the witch pie in Jim's pan, and we put the 3 tin plates in the bottom of the pan under the vittles, and so Jim got everything all right, and as soon as he was by himself he busted into the pie and hid the rope ladder inside of his straw tick, and scratched some marks on a tin plate and throwed it out of the window hole. End of chapter.